Hello, this is the weekly horoscope forecast with Jin Chabiol on Chronosight. This is the narrative spanning from December 1st to 15th in the early part of December 2025. November was, how should I put it, it was quite dramatic and had a significant number of changes, so December in comparison isn't such an impactful period. However, both Saturn and Neptune are presently situated in Pisces. It's called Pisces. The celestial bodies in Pisces are presently being trailed by Mercury, Venus, and Mars, creating ongoing square aspects. Consequently, when 3 planets establish squares with 2 additional ones, it culminates in a total of 6 squares. 6 squares transpire, and they predominantly occur due to that particular structure. Given that both Pisces and Sagittarius are governed by the planet Jupiter, the celestial configurations taking place this December are primarily not centered around tangible conflicts. Instead, they revolve around disputes concerning justifications, or who inflicted harm upon whom, ultimately resulting in disagreements over what is right and wrong. So it's like a competition to see who can make the other look worse. The initial incoming celestial structure involves the planet Venus transitioning into the Sagittarius constellation, where it encounters the stars Dschubba and Acrab located in Scorpio. These particular stars can be regarded as somewhat akin to the stars of minor offenders. There exists a notable connection with certain unlawful aspects, yet given that Dschubba and Acrab are in close proximity, they nearly always converge whenever a celestial body traverses their path. The one celestial body that is relatively more harmonious with them is the planet Venus. When Venus makes its passage, it generally tends to regard them with comparatively greater respect. This runs from December 3rd to the morning of the 4th, focusing on people who act innocent while hiding. Basically, those who don't show their true feelings and act a bit naive, pretending not to know much. I don't really know, so I'll just listen to everything you say. Actually, I have no intention of listening to you at all. There exist individuals like this, and favorable opportunities tend to present themselves to them. Individuals who have behaved as though they are not very knowledgeable, lack determination, and possess no ambition will have an opportunity to grasp something of considerable significance. Creating Venus in Venus-Dschubba-Acrab signifies possessing a certain degree of ambition. However, even if it is merely a facade, it involves feigning humility and cultivating a personality that can retreat slightly due to pride, rather than advancing to engage in conflicts with others. Such a personality trait can ultimately result in financial prosperity. So it's about being practical. Instead of fighting with others just to win, it's about being practical and securing money. Such a structure can appear at this time, and a day later Mercury moves and meets Unukalhai, the Alpha Serpentis, which is considered a malefic star. It operates from the evening of December 3rd to the morning of the 5th. During that particular time I employed a somewhat clever trick to resolve the issue. However, at present it feels somewhat uneasy because it appears that the consequences might not be favorable in the future. Therefore, even during this particular period, given that Unukalhai is a celestial body intricately associated with illegality and significance, it is essential to exercise great caution regarding the language used in the contract when entering into an agreement. This is a time when it is quite easy to be misled by others. In just 2 days, the planet Mars will transition and align with Ras Alhague, the prominent alpha star within the constellation of Ophiuchus. The structure runs from early morning on December 5th to the 6th. As I mentioned in the previous week, Ras Alhague possesses a somewhat autistic characteristic, similar to the stars within the Ophiuchus constellation. Nevertheless, among all of them, Ras Alhague stands out as the finest. Being an alpha star, it represents possessing one's own steadfast and unwavering opinions. Individuals were expressing rather intense opinions, but as it became excessively severe, an official warning might be issued at the community level or from higher authorities. If you keep causing trouble by talking like this, you'll face big trouble later, something like that. This could be a country, a society, or even a family, right? That's what a community is. Similarly, conflicts that are difficult to compromise on regarding politics, religion, society, and economy can become issues between certain groups or classes. Unfortunately, these days are called the era of great hatred, where it has become a trend to shift blame to others. In the past, even if there were problems, we would acknowledge our own faults and strive to do better. In the past, it was considered a virtue to recognize and admit one's own mistakes. However, in recent times, there seems to be an unusual trend where acknowledging faults makes individuals appear foolish, leading people to often shift the blame onto others when issues arise. So conflicts of that nature, which are difficult to compromise on, can become issues and cause a lot of noise. In just 3 days, the planet Venus will transition and come into alignment with the royal star Antares, which is the alpha star of the constellation Scorpio. Aside from the Moon, Antares does not have a significant number of planets that are particularly compatible with it. So, in any case, it is not particularly favorable with Venus either, but it functions from the afternoon of the 8th until the 9th. This aspect is quite suspicious, yet not pessimistic, which is a defining characteristic of the star Antares. Filled with doubt, fundamentally lacks trust in others, does not place trust in people. To be more precise, they don't even have trust in themselves. So, Antares is a star where the basic distrust and suspicion are extremely strong, but the funny thing is, it's not pessimistic. Just because there's a lot of suspicion doesn't mean it's cynical or pessimistic, saying nothing will work out. Instead, it has dreams. This will definitely be achieved. However, there's a lot of doubt. It's a very peculiar star, that's how Antares is. So, if you truly have to classify it, it's somewhat distinct from optimism, yet it remains goal-oriented. Additionally, there's an inclination to establish goals that are quite lofty. There's an internal contradiction in that they tend to somewhat overestimate themselves while simultaneously lacking trust in themselves. Nevertheless, they are doubtful, but not pessimistic, and such a character can become central in a problematic situation. This individual might potentially be the root of the issue or the one who resolves it. And then there's a scenario where the project is successfully completed, yet everyone who participated in it is left with a sense of dissatisfaction. Even if the work was deemed successful, it's not easy for those individuals to come together once more and build effective teamwork. This is also a characteristic of Antares, as Antares is fundamentally somewhat self-righteous. They are very self-righteous and stubborn. Ultimately, it frequently turns out that what Antares articulates is indeed accurate, yet because individuals often tend to dismiss him as foolish or overlook him, his relationships with those surrounding him are not particularly strong. The combination of Venus and Antares tends to manifest these traits quite prominently. Mars establishes a square with Saturn on the identical day, not a couple of days afterward. Mars establishes a square with Saturn. It operates from December 4th to the afternoon of the 14th. In a way, it's one of the most powerful configurations that occurred in December. One of the configurations? No, this Mars-Saturn square is likely the most substantial structure. This is somewhat of a challenging situation, to express it frankly. Decision makers, such as the boss in a company, frequently attempt to overstep established boundaries. There is a kind of consensus based on existing conventions and customs that, at the very least, we shouldn't do this. There's an implicit consensus or rule, but some try to break it. Because of the extreme methods of decision makers who try to cross the line, their aides, staff, or subordinates may find themselves in a difficult situation as they struggle to curb this person's stubbornness, but it's not easy. In a similar manner, this concept can be applied to a nation, a corporation, and even a simple household or a small community. As I mentioned earlier, it can evolve into a rather trivial conflict over justification. To outsiders who are unaware of the intricate details, it appears as though they are intensely battling to obtain justification. However, to those familiar with the internal narrative, it seems rather trivial. Did you really criticize someone so much just to gain this little thing? So, how should I articulate this? It can appear as though it is an armchair debate. It's akin to visible individuals engaging in a struggle to obtain an intangible justification. And then there might arise circumstances where a group that typically appears easy to suppress unexpectedly pushes back with significant force, causing astonishment. So, in what we refer to as the Mars-Saturn major structure, individuals are hitting, dying, terrorism occurs, fires break out, and so forth. However, this time with the Mars-Saturn square, it's somewhat different, and it's more likely to unfold as an ideological or justification battle. Subsequently, on the day following tomorrow, Mercury transitions and establishes an opposition with Uranus. This influence will persist from the evening of December 9th until the afternoon of December 12th. Mercury has not yet resumed its usual velocity. Once it ceases, it will convene for a slightly extended duration than is typically customary. Throughout this period, there could potentially be some startling developments in the IT sector or within the realms of intellectual property rights, which will likely induce some disturbances within the industry. There will be certain transitions and transformations occurring within the industry. Therefore, it is not necessarily an issue if the present leader remains in the leading position, yet there is this understated news suggesting that the current top position holder might unexpectedly crumble without leaving any trace, resulting in a tense and chaotic situation. If I happen to fall, then who will ascend to become the next leader? It is uncertain whom to invest in or whose side to take, and such a confusing situation could occur in the IT sector or in the field of intellectual property rights. On the identical day, Pluto encounters Altair, and given that Pluto is an exceedingly slow-moving celestial body, it technically aligns on December 11th. However, the period of influence is remarkably extended. It functions from November 4th through December 29th, spanning nearly 8 weeks, and since it has been active since November 4th, it is already under its substantial influence. If you express beliefs or ideals, intense confrontations may arise. So, how should I articulate this? Have you heard about the neoconservatives around the years 2002 or 2003 in the United States? The neoconservatives in the United States, during the period when George W. Bush ascended to power, included prominent individuals such as Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, who were notably hardline in their approaches. They were among the extremely conservative or even far-right individuals who concentrated on employing warfare as a means to secure foreign interests. In a manner of speaking, Altair exhibits significant aggression. It is indeed aggressive, yet it strives for lofty ideals akin to an eagle, which serves as an emblem of the Roman Empire, and, in some respects, the United States endeavoring to mirror the Roman Empire. This is the reason I was reminded of the neoconservatives, although it remains quite violent. It is indeed quite violent in its pursuit of beliefs and ideals. It is a star of such nature, yet when it encounters Pluto, which symbolizes warfare and monopoly, the situation becomes less favorable. It has the potential to escalate to extreme levels. However, it's not a pure situation for Altair because Pluto is involved, and Pluto is associated with plutocracy, which means politics driven by wealth. In other words, it is deeply connected with situations where conflicts arise over interests, fighting for interests, and fighting to gain interests. Therefore, while there is an external conflict that appears to be based on ideals, the real underlying cause might actually be a complex and messy struggle over various interests. Additionally, when internal power struggles take place and they attempt to resolve these issues by generating conflicts externally, this is a phenomenon observable in numerous countries and throughout history. To address internal deficiencies, they strike outwardly, they manufacture problems beyond their borders. When internal power struggles become too intense, they try to eliminate them by starting a war outside. So, when Pluto and the star meet, Pluto's orbit is very long and slow, so it doesn't usually manifest in personal matters, but rather on a collective or national level. This time is no exception. Pluto is violent, but Altair is even more aggressive, which could lead to diplomatic disputes on an international political level or new wars. Even with the ongoing wars not yet concluded, new conflicts might arise. Certain indications or signs of a potential new war might begin to emerge. On that very same day, Venus encounters the southern bending. The southern bending is recognized as the midpoint situated between the south node and the north node, and it is commonly referred to as the southern bending. The meeting of the southern bending and Venus occurs at 13 degrees of Sagittarius on December 11th. Therefore, it will be active from the morning of December 9th until the 13th. I was aware that it would inevitably conclude at this juncture, therefore I attempted to separate on good terms, but against my expectations, an unpleasant conclusion is in store. There may be a persistent feeling of bitterness lingering until the absolute end. In the commercial industry, when a client unexpectedly alters their approach, particularly not in the retail sector but within the wholesale domain, it becomes exceedingly troublesome when a client undergoes a change. We create the entire system from scratch. We have to start over, and there's a bit of a power struggle that occurs outside the rules. In areas not covered by the contract, the stronger one prevails. So it's important not to just raise voices and clash with each other. It's quite exhausting to negotiate, do sales, and occasionally raise your voice. So we need to build the system from scratch and create a new routine. This is when such inconveniences may arise. To be more precise, it's not that the hassle is appearing right now, but rather there's a sort of uneasy sensation, a fear that such hassle will come crashing down in the future. Oh, I'm in a bit of trouble. I guess I'll have to work overtime for the next 2 months. I guess I'll have to drink a lot too. It's one of those situations where you have to brace yourself for it, you know what I mean. Subsequently, on the day following the next, which celestial body does retrograde Jupiter encounter? It encounters Pollux, the beta star of the Gemini constellation. This alignment will be influential from December 3rd through the 18th. Given that Jupiter has recently commenced its retrograde motion, its velocity is relatively slow. Consequently, it prolongs its duration significantly at the start and becomes somewhat shorter as it approaches the conclusion. Now, there are times when it's not my fault, it's not my mistake or error, but I get blamed for the mistakes of people around me, like family, acquaintances, or friends. It's quite unfair, isn't it? Such situations can happen. And when you get unfairly punished in your group, you might think, I worked 120, so why do I only get 80? In this way. And because there is a bit of unfairness or dispute around, why does that person get 120 for doing only 80, and why do I get 80? It's unfair. However, the circumstances surrounding adults do not consistently operate with honesty, which can lead to considerable dissatisfaction stemming from such adult circumstances. Consequently, the situation becomes significantly tense. The atmosphere intensifies considerably. Situations that would usually be resolved through dialogue or mutual agreement are instead being addressed with more forceful measures such as accusations, formal complaints, or even legal actions. Subsequently, after a day passes, the planet Mars shifts its position and establishes a square aspect with the Sun. This particular celestial event takes place on the 14th of December and remains active starting from the afternoon of the 12th, continuing until the 16th. At this time, there could be major accidents due to drug abuse or misuse, especially when utilizing medications that alleviate pain, provide anesthesia, or soothe individuals, which have the potential to somewhat dull a person's cognitive abilities. Issues might emerge. Likewise, there exists a significant likelihood of infections acquired within hospitals or medical mishaps. Consequently, it is essential to exercise caution in all areas where anesthesia is necessary, particularly in those disciplines that necessitate anesthesia. Regarding previous matters, in a frenzied and tumultuous situation, I temporarily forgot about the impulsive decisions I had made earlier, but now it's akin to a substantial debt coming back towards me. I truly regret it. I ought not to have made such a rash and impulsive decision at that time. I truly should have exercised greater care and caution. Because I failed to do so, I am now confronting the repercussions as time goes on. On the very same day, Mercury arrives and encounters the Dschubba-Acrab, which Venus had met earlier in the month. This interaction takes place from December 14th and continues until the morning of the 15th. Therefore, during this period, when Dschubba-Acrab meets with Venus, it becomes somewhat favorable. However, when it encounters Mercury, it is not favorable at all. There could genuinely be an unpleasant altercation, akin to a trivial and shameful dispute over a minor sum of money, and given that these celestial bodies have a pronounced inclination towards unlawful behavior, particularly drishti, it often manifests in such a manner. Engaging in illegal means might appear to be an easy route, as if by merely compromising slightly on one's moral conscience, the issue could be resolved effortlessly. Because it seems so straightforward, it might be tempting to partake in such unlawful activities. However, there's a well-known saying that, regardless of how hungry you are, consuming spoiled meat will inevitably cause significant problems later on. That's the way it is. Therefore, if you succumb to the allure of such an effortlessly tempting path during this period, you could potentially find yourself regretting it significantly in the future. And on the following day, as Venus progresses in its celestial journey, it encounters Sabik, the beta star of the Ophiuchus constellation, which Mars had encountered at the conclusion of November in the previous week. It's a setup running from early morning on the 15th to early morning on the 16th. Like Dschubba-Acrab, this star called Sabik is also a very dense star, but it has a particularly good rapport when it meets Venus. This is indeed the ideal moment to unveil the outcomes of something you've meticulously prepared with considerable time and effort. When I revealed something I'd spent ages preparing and perfecting, the response was amazing. People said, "Wow, this person is a true master, they did great," and I received such praise. It's not just about having a competitive edge, but when people in the same industry look at it, they might say, is there really someone this crazy? That's the level of perfectionism that exists. It's a personal investment. Instead of merely making it sell successfully, it can attain a degree of perfection that no one else would even dare to endeavor. Typically, an individual could be criticized for setting such an exceedingly ambitious goal relative to the effort and time invested. Nevertheless, in this particular instance, such an intense obsession with perfectionism can lead to favorable feedback or rewards. Consequently, in situations where there is a Sabik present in the natal chart or Venus serves as an indicator of accomplishment, it will radiate even more brilliantly. That concludes the Chronosight weekly horoscope for the beginning of December 2025. Thank you very much.